everybody. I am Elizabeth Stephenson, and thank you guys so much for being here today. Previously, we've been going through a world history timeline, but now we've arrived at the present time. So all that history we've already covered, that's all well and good. Those are nice stories about other people, for other people. But I've noticed it seems easier to comprehend when it's applied to someone else than it is to personalize the story. Even when I lay out answers and illustrate the possibility of a creator God, what usually comes up is that there seems to be a barrier to want to take the next step in the relationship and bring this God character home. There's plenty of rational, unemotional reasons why people find the idea of God unbelievable. For example, a lot of people say it's the science of the universe or the history of religious men holding them back from accepting the possibility of a creator God. Very impersonal reasons. I love people though, and I love hearing their stories and digging into their past and finding out what makes them tick and how they came to be the way that they are. And through my seeking, I've noticed that contrarily, there's usually several current personal reasons, questions making it impossible for some people to refuse the possibility of a loving creator. So let's work our way through those waters next. First, they think that they've got to change to become more perfect, that they are right now to have a relationship with God, but that's not true. God celebrates losers, the downtrodden, the underdogs. Jesus himself invited a known current tax collector to be a part of his team, which is basically like saying he invited a crooked cop or a mobster into the inner circle. So if past precedent predicts future behavior, then people don't need to worry about coming into the inner circle no matter who they are. They don't have to stop drinking, doing drugs, hoeing, telling white lies, gossiping, posting cruel Twitter remarks, or just generally being an awful person to join. Just come out, talk to him, open up to a relationship and see what happens. Or opposite, they think that they're already a good person with a natural moral compass. Why mess with a good thing? They feel they don't need God or religion to tell them what's right. They naturally already have it in their hearts. But that would be like a person saying that they weren't a dancer because they already had great rhythm and could just groove naturally. You'd think, well, that just makes you more of a dancer, not less of one. It's just that they don't like labels, and I get that. I feel like sometimes they can all seem like sucky options when you're looking for which religious label to choose. But when it's done right, church isn't about stupidly listening to having someone tell someone how to be good. It's about worshiping the Creator and taking focused time to connect with Him and the invisible power of intermingled souls, that great world soul connection that we were talking about earlier. The sermons are secondary to renewing our spirit and reminding us of the needs in our heart and our lives. It's not just about getting from other people there. Sometimes it's about giving to them. The other people are there to encourage us, and we're there to encourage them. So if someone is feeling like a fly mofo right now, then that probably means that it's your season to be the giver. Odds are good that in the future, you'll have seasons where you need to be given too. Life's like that. There's good times and bad times. And finally, the worst pain is usually that they can't reconcile how God has hurt them or forgotten them or seemingly left them in an unbelievably shitty situation. And here's where I want to park. I think it's the biggest hurdle for many people, maybe even more so than the science and the world history, is the awful times of personal history. I had to stop writing this chapter and come back to it because I was struggling with the content. The thing is that I know it feels kind of dreary, yet I also know that in those valleys is where the deepest barriers lie. So much as it's unpleasant talking about, I know I needed to go there. And y'all, I get it. I really do. I've felt hurt and forgotten and left many times in my life. I have literally sobbed in desperation, crying out to God. Whitney's been there during those dire situations for miraculous help. I've suffered the consequences when he didn't save it in the way that I wanted him to. I still suffer some of those complications, so I get it. And I think that if you are struggling with those kinds of questions, then you probably have good reason to. And so I wanted to talk about that. I think that if the Creator were real, then he's the kind of Father who would come into your home behind closed doors and in secret places, and he would bend down and gently put his hands on your knees and look deeply in your eyes and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what they've done to you. I'm so sorry for how much you've been hurt. I hate seeing you in pain, but I want you to know that I love you so much, more than anything. And I'm gonna make this better. Everything will be okay. And if you were to look back into his eyes, you'd probably see generations of pain and hurt stored up in them. Imagine what he's seen. Imagine the pain that he's felt. If he really is omnipotent, then every pain that has ever happened in the world he carries within him. Every pain that has ever occurred in the world, he knows of. He was there. He saw it happen. He's seen what you've gone through. He lived it with you, and he knows. But I think that he'd tell you not to look at it. It's probably too much. It would probably just really overwhelm your heart and your mind. And I think that he'd tell you not to look at it, not to see that and think about that, but just to look at the love in his eyes and feel it. To make that real, I think of Hagar. She was Abraham and Sarah's servant. Basically, she gets screwed and runs into the desert to get away from them. And an angel of the Lord finds her and comforts her and blesses her. She ultimately returns, but not before recommitting herself to he whom she calls the God who sees me. And I think that more than anything, so many of us need that past precedent to know that he's the God who sees you, no matter who you are. Because if he can see Hagar, a jilted, faithless servant woman on the lowest tier of the caste system at that time, then he sees you. God demonstrates his faithfulness through his presence, not his predictability. He never promises that life will be pain-free. In fact, he actually promises the opposite. It'll hurt at times, but he won't ever leave us. He's with us even when we're not with him. He loves us even when we don't love him. He knows us when we don't know him. If you want to get to know him, read your Bible. The Bible is also known as the Word because it's the words of God. And you'll read a love story. It's a love letter to you. God wants us to know him. The whole Bible displays his eagerness to genuinely connect with people. That's what we've been talking about in those historical messages throughout the millennium. And I want to share with you a story I came across in my research. The details are fuzzy. I couldn't find it again to cite directly for you, but the point remains. It was about a preacher who had had a hard life. He had had a lot of bad things happen when he was a younger man. And so in preacher school, he found himself hiding a lot of anger and going through the motions of what he thought he should do and saying all of the niceties that a good Christian says. But a mentor saw through the facade and took him to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. I don't know if they were already there or how that connected, but the mentor told him to hit the wall. He wanted him to punch the wall for every indiscretion he had suffered. Hit it for every time that he had been hurt, victimized, wounded in his life. Just keep hitting it and objecting to God for every harm he had been carrying. Just keep hitting, keep crying out, keep hitting, keep crying out. He eventually had punched it all out and collapsed at the foot of the wall in a puddle of tears and what he described as sweet relief. And that was how he said he learned how to pray, Praying, communing, bonding with the Creator isn't about putting on a front and saying the right words of niceties to please His ears. It's honest, it's open, it's raw and real. No one should try to fake it or to try so hard. Just be free and be as messed up and as broken as you may feel at the moment, as ugly as it may be, it's all good. Like literally, it's all good. If you're mad at God, I don't doubt that you have good reason to be. To say that you don't believe in the power of prayer is to say that you don't believe in the power of cognitive behavioral therapy. At its most basic function, that's all it is. And so that leads me to one of the biggest and hardest questions most people ever face, far more challenging than sometimes the history, is how a so-called loving God could allow such suffering in the world. Things that seem neither good nor loving. To help shed light on that question, I've collected answers for suffering, and it will help you understand the really big picture and explain how a good God allows suffering. First, I think the Creator is disciplining us. You know, parents know that you really can do a disservice to children if you don't discipline them. I think also the Creator is allowing us to feel the consequences of our actions. Sometimes He's graceful and doesn't allow us to feel the actions, but sometimes it's actually in our best interest or the group's best interest that you do feel the consequence of your actions. The Creator's teaching us, and so there's a message that He wants us to learn, something to break through there. The Creator is closing doors to prevent us from going down wrong roads, or He's testing us. I think sometimes that can be a tricky one. People often hear that, well, maybe your faith is being tested. And it's like, well, why? And then also, the Creator won't take away anyone's free will. It does seem that He's got that as a, how to say it, an unfailing rule that He won't let go for Himself. And even as I'm saying that, I know the words are wrong, because the thing is that He is a God of love. And free will is an act of love, okay? And so if He takes away free will, then that's a disservice of love. So He'll never take away free will. He's not going to stop somebody from having their right to friggin' suck, okay? But the Creator is flawless. It's impossible for Him to screw things up. The errors of the world, darkness and pain are our faults, not His. As love, He'll never take away our free will. That would entirely contradict His character. And if He'll never take away your free will, then likewise, He refuses to take away someone else's free will. They have the freedom to be awful and hurtful. A BBC reporter once asked Mother Teresa, how can you believe in a God that allows such terrible poverty for His children? To which she replied, poverty is not made by God. It's created by you and me when we don't share what we have. It's a great example of one of the many ways that we can use our free will to do disservice to others. And when I want to get angry about it, what helped me was to remember all the times that I've used my free will to hurt people. I had to recognize some of the things that I've done with my free will, surely at one point or another, resulted in someone else's pain, their wanting, their need. And you may need to own your part too. It's hard, but it helps. Speaking of helping, out of His goodness, He will restore goodness. He will heal. He will rebuild. He will repair. He will revive. All darkness, ultimately for the betterment of others, He'll fix it. That is one thing He does promise to us. The other major need is to recognize that our personal idea of happiness is not the goal. Nowhere in the Holy Scriptures did I find the Creator saying that He just wants people to be happy. That idea is actually very deceptive. It's relatively modern, too. Happiness is shallow and fleeting. He wants us to have joy, but that's very different. Joy is in your soul. It's contentment and peace. And peace comes from within. It's a forged and created nirvana. Our desire for happiness will never trump His desire to make us good and to be good Himself. it will also never trump his big picture plan. There are a lot of moving parts beyond you and your life, beyond me and my life, and a lot of needs in the world and important arrangements perfectly aligned for his children's benefit. So you may not necessarily be able to see the big picture and all of the other things going on behind the scenes. Let's use the apostles' death as an example. Except for John, they all died horrible, gruesome deaths. And these guys, these were Jesus' personal, most bestest friends. And yet they all died in a tragic way. The Creator didn't save them from that suffering. However, now we cite the way those men died as evidence that Jesus was Lord, to the degree that had God altered their story, many other souls might have ultimately been lost. And we'll talk about death more in the next chapter. But I think that's an excellent illustration of God using the apostles' murderers' free will to the big picture good of those affected by it. God will transform and move mountains to bring us to faith. That's the biggest picture of this stuff. It's about goodness and then joy. The Creator doesn't seem to be the type that accepts himself as being used as a tool of instant consolation in a time of need, like a Band-Aid that you just going to toss into the trash after the wound is healed. And while he may occasionally cater to fair weather friends, the only thing that you can really do to ruin his connection with you is turn your back on him for good and walk away. It's when you emotionally and mentally push him out in favor for living for yourself only. Not everyone wants to have a relationship with the Creator. Not everyone wants responsibility or accountability for their actions. It may seem like I've been talking about everybody like we're all in this, we all want this kind of thing. There is that group who chooses to not like this idea. They, for their reasonable reasons, have decided that that's not what they want to do. Okay, and that's their option to do that. And so everyone still has accountability and responsibility for their actions. While believers and non-believers both screw up, flawlessness isn't a reliable litmus test for faithfulness. And when a believer allows themselves to stop trying, it's like they untie themselves. It may seem beautifully freeing and a lot of fun at the moment or for weeks or months or years, but one day it'll catch up with them. Maybe not in this life, maybe the next life, but it's all in their head and their heart. Usually it's even unperceivable to their loved ones. But they know when they're done and that they've just, decided not give a hoot anymore. Humans can choose to rebel. Losing a relationship with the Creator is only to our loss. The actions which we allow ourselves to dive into are called sins. They're usually what feel good at the time, thus their appeal. But something will happen, and we'll realize that we've become the cause of someone else's suffering. We've damaged other people, or we've caused hurt. That's all sins are. If you look at the 10 Commandments, for example, they're all about people. It's a list of 10 rules to not hurt your neighbor, your spouse, your parents, or yourself, or God. And that's huge. I know a lot of people tend to think that God is just telling them not to sin to keep them from having fun, when in reality, all of those things he tells us not to do are for ours and others' protection. And I'll tell you honestly, because I try really hard to do good, but the more that I sin, the more that I love others and I understand people, because it's hard and I know that I can be weak. So it makes sense when they're weak too. It's absolutely a mind game in practicing increasing amounts of self-control. I love the Buddhist teaching of nirvana. You find consuming inner peace when you finally managed to perfectly control yourself. And I know that's a lot of talk about sin and kind of the downside of the story. And I wanted to explain it though, because a lot of people struggle with this whole sin concept. They're aware of ethics, moral good and bad, and they've got this compass. And so those words, morals, sin, really ultimately are synonymous, okay? And really at the end of the day, people who are going through their average day-to-day lives and living, I believe that they're trying to do good. They're trying to live by a moral standard. And so I wanted to just finish with that and remind everybody that, like, yeah, we can talk about sin and all of that, but at the end of the day, I believe that people are good. And so I wanted to kind of end with a positive note about how much I respect people and love them and recognize that in them. And so I thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to pick up next chapter. We're going to be talking about the afterlife, actually. I'm kind of excited. There's some really cool stuff that we're going to be getting into and some amazing statistics that I found. It's actually really good. So I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Guys, I feel great.